The Hormone Myth, How Junk Science, Gender Politics, and Lies About PMS Keep Women Down. I'm Stephen Kent, and this is Bookmarks. Hello and welcome to Bookmarks. I'm your host, Stephen Kent. In the past year, the women's movement in America has taken on a more assertive stance, with the Women's March on Washington and now the Me Too movement. In the midst of all this, a new book takes on what the author perceives as one of the main causes of women's subjugation, The Hormone Myth, How Junk Science, Gender Politics, and Lies About PMS Keep Women Down, by Robyn Stein DeLuca. Dr. DeLuca joins us today to discuss the book. She is a health psychologist and the founder and CEO of DeLuca Insight, providing speeches, workshops, and private coaching about resisting stereotypes and realizing individual potential. After 15 years on the faculty at Stony Brook University, she decided to apply her expertise to supporting the transitions of women and couples to new parenthood. And joining us to critique the book is Dr. Scott Yenor, a professor of political science at Boise State University, where he teaches political philosophy. He earned his PhD from Loyola University, Chicago, and his BA from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. He is the author of Family Politics, The Idea of Marriage and Modern Political Thought. He is currently working on a book on the principles of family regime for the modern world. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So, Dr. DeLuca, could you give us in a nutshell the main thesis of your book?
Yes, the premise of my book is that while reproductive hormones cause some emotional and physical symptoms in women, they don't give them mental disorders. Women aren't going crazy every month. They don't become depressed, irrational people when they go through menopause. And studies show that the great majority of women function professionally, emotionally, with their families at a very high level at most times in their life, no matter what time of the month or time of their life. And part of the book is that it's a dangerous idea to suggest that hormones make women crazy, because it makes it easy to invalidate their opinions, and it also helps to keep them out of powerful positions. So the major message of my book is that I want women to know they don't have to worry about their bodies betraying them. The best science that we have says that hormone levels do go up and down, and it's a natural good thing, and they regulate all kinds of physical processes, but they don't make us crazy people.
And Dr. Yenor, thank you for joining us also. What is your critique of the book?
Well, I like the subtitle of Robyn's book. I think it summarizes it, and I think it also allows us to I think, differentiate the strengths and the weaknesses, in my view, of the book. The subtitle is How Junk Science, Gender Politics, and Lies About PMS Keep Women Down. And I think the book is extremely strong in showing how the various events that Robyn is concerned with, namely menopause, premenstrual syndrome, pregnancy, don't make women crazy. I think that the book, its greatest weakness is that it doesn't really demonstrate what, to me, is in the last part, that these myths keep women down, that they're an important part of the patriarchal system that she thinks keep women down.
Well, why don't we begin with that? So in what ways do you think that the myth is actually sort of perpetuating patriarchy? And I guess we can sort of keep it narrow, perhaps in the workplace.
Well, in the workplace, if a woman shows anger or for any reason is irritated, very often people might say, "Oh, are you on the rag?" And they want to invalidate why you might be upset with them. And your opinions get shoved to the side and seen as unimportant and just biologically caused. So in that context, it can make it very hard to get heard. But there's also this idea that women shouldn't be in powerful positions, shouldn't lead companies, shouldn't be in upper level management, because there's this idea that they become irrational, they are too emotional. I mean, in the political forum, we've certainly seen this. Last year when Hillary Clinton was running for president, Time magazine ran a piece that said, "Isn't it great? She's postmenopausal. We won't have to worry about all those crazy mood swings." Well, no matter what your politics are, most people would agree Hillary Clinton was a very high-functioning person her whole career. And we saw that again a few years ago when Sonia Sotomayor was up for Supreme Court Justice. While those hearings were going on, one radio show host said, well, you better hope her hearings, the conferences that they have, are not while right before her period. You don't know what you're going to get then. So to me, those are very hard and tangible examples of how the myth that hormones make women crazy is used to keep them out of power.
Scott, I want to get you in here. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I just don't think that those are very pervasive views. I think that, I mean, if there was a big pie that constituted how people judged Hillary Clinton or Justice Sotomayor, I think their hormonal status with respect to their menopausal condition was minuscule. And I also, I mean, going back to the first point that Robyn makes, I mean, we all know, and she points it out well in the book, that there are fewer women CEOs and fewer women senators, and obviously no women heads of state, at least in the United States yet. And you know, I think that we should probably look for other explanations for those phenomenon, not the hormone myth. And although I think that there may be actually a relationship between women's hormones and the fact that fewer women are CEOs, but I don't think the hormones as mediated through these particular events contributes a large portion of that difference.
Well, it was fascinating to me, Scott, that you just said, I don't think this idea that hormones are powerful play a strong role in keeping women down. But then right after that, you said, I think women's hormones are a reason why there aren't as many women CEOs. So I'd be interested to hear what you meant by that.
Well, I just meant that I tried to make a distinction between the hormones through these particular events, that is pregnancy and menopause and menstruation. There are particular ideas of hormones that have to do with that, but there are also particular hormones that have to do with, you know, I'm talking about oxytocin and estrogen that have to do with bonding and attachments and things that women have more of than men. And the book doesn't address that, but at least, you know, a lot of sociobiological literature traces women's differences in commitment to career to the presence of those kind of hormones. And so that's the distinction I'm trying to make there.
Okay, well, I think part of the reality in how women are treated, there are a lot of suits brought against companies because of pregnancy discrimination, and a lot of that, maybe we can't say it's specifically that people say, it's the hormones. They think there's something biological going on that makes a woman not able to do her job. And because of that, she's been kept out of promotions, pushed aside, not given opportunities. So in that, I think those are very concrete ways that women are missing out on opportunities and kept in lower status by this idea that hormones are making them less able to function.
I mean, my take and experience on this has to do with, you know, one of the last jobs I had, we hired a marketing director. Within 1 month, she was out for pregnancy. And she started heading towards the door. And I think the entire team in that instance sort of felt like, oh my gosh, we have no marketing director. We just brought somebody on. And maybe that's sort of speaking to why Scott, you know, is thinking that there's other reasons why maybe those hiring decisions don't get made. Do you think that there is some merit to that? Well,
I think that a lot of people suspect that women go out on maternity leave, they're not coming back. Yeah. But evidence shows us about 75% of women do come back. So it's not a really reasonable thought to have. But it's this idea, women are going home, they're just going to want to nest, they won't come back to work. Well, the financial reality, that's usually a big reason. Most women do come back.
Scott, I want to kick it back to you since you have reviewed this book. What is another critique you'd like to bring up and have a discussion about?
Well, so let me ask Robyn something about that. So as I understand it, the idea of hormones didn't arrive until the early 1900s. Am I right about that?
Well, specifically about hormones, I mean, the scientific understanding of how they worked wasn't known until the early 1900s and a little bit later.
So why did patriarchy exist before 1900?
Oh,
in your
of course,
view?
of course.
All right, so
But
what
I would
explained
relate
it?
that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, what explained it?
I would relate that to other ideas about women being biologically bound. I mean, back to Aristotle, Hippocrates, they thought that a woman's uterus floated throughout her body, and when it got in the wrong place, that made her melancholy and unreasonable. So this idea that women are ruled by their biology much more so than men, that's been around for a long time.
And when I think about the early 1900s, I think about the progressive era and more justifications for science, sort of having retroactive and regressive policies on minority groups. And I think that that might be another example where maybe science was used to reinstitute something that was already there before.
Well, I mean, I think science has been used for social purposes, and we have to be really careful in what we interpret and what different studies find. And it's been used to justify keeping people out of using racial discrimination, sexual discrimination. And I think people have to be really good consumers of all kinds of science. And one of the best ways to do that is to not make any grand conclusions until there's really a preponderance of evidence about a certain finding.
So I wanted to ask you about, I guess, what is a common misunderstanding that you have highlighted in your book, which is postpartum depression. I've seen what I thought in my life was an instance of postpartum depression, but you say that that's not linked to hormones. What would you like to explain to people about this book and your findings?
Well, there's actually 3 kinds of postpartum depression, and the media gets it wrong all the time. The first kind takes place in the first 10 days after the birth of the baby. There's weepiness, you might feel irritable, feeling out of sorts. That is because of your hormones plummeting in that first 10 days after childbirth. But the kind of postpartum depression that hangs around, that is just like a major depressive episode, lasts longer than 2 weeks, feelings of despondency, sadness, can't sleep, tearfulness, that has no relationship to hormone levels. The biggest predictor of whether you'll have that kind of depression after pregnancy is whether you were depressed beforehand. So knowing people's history is important. But the other major predictors are what kind of social support do you have at home? How is your relationship with your partner? How difficult or easy is your baby? And those are things that can mostly be addressed. So I think it's a disadvantage when people say, oh, it's hormones, it's going to go away on its own. Well, it's not that simple, and you don't need to just leave it alone. You really could help it by doing things to support that mother better. And then the third kind, which I do like to mention, is extremely rare, is postpartum psychosis. And that's when a woman has a psychotic break within the first 30 days after her childbirth. And this is where she may hear hallucinations, have delusions. It's extremely rare, 1% to 2% of women get this. And this is what gets sensationalized in the media when we hear about mothers who have threatened their children or have murdered their children, which is horrific. But what's really negative about the way the media presents this, many times postpartum psychosis in the media is referred to as postpartum depression. Okay. And I think that's bad for women because if they feel depressed, they think, I can't tell anybody because then it sounds like I have that disease where you want to kill your baby. And that's the worst thing a mother could do. So I'm not going to get help. I'm not going to talk about it. So the public misperception that hormones play a role in postpartum depression and that postpartum psychosis is something like postpartum depression is really dangerous.
Scott, I want to get you in here. Do you think that there's anything to be lost by sort of changing the way that we think about things like that, postpartum?
No, I mean, that was one of my 2 favorite parts of the book. I really like the way Robyn went through and made distinctions that aren't usually drawn by the people who discuss that, and I think she really demonstrated that the depression that some women feel after giving birth is really traceable to previous states of depression. So I thought that was really impressive. And the thing that I took away from that, or a question that I had when I was done with it, is, at least I've read in several other books, this is not like my total specialty, that women are twice as likely to suffer from depression as men are.
That's exactly right.
So that's an interesting thing, and I think you tried to explain that with reference to social contradictions Is that a cross-cultural thing, Robyn? Do you know?
It is.
I mean, is that something that we see in Sweden and we see it in
all over the world?
Namibia?
It is a widespread difference that we see that 2-to-1 ratio. And I think it's a really good subject to bring up, because whereas people can agree that there is this difference, there's a lot of disagreement as to what causes it. And one possibility is there may be something biological that's different about men and women that puts women in a more vulnerable position. But to me, it's really interesting to consider that those numbers switch when you look at substance abuse and use of illicit drugs, that men are twice as likely to partake in illicit drugs to the point where it really hurts their functioning than women. So that suggests that everybody's got the same underlying emotional difficulties, but it's socially acceptable for a woman to say, I'm going to go to a doctor and get help for this, and less socially acceptable for a man, but more okay for him to reach for a bottle or a pill.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difference between men being willing to engage in much riskier activity, it seems. That is, they take this unsettlement that you're talking about that might be universal, and they go in riskier directions. Women withdraw. I mean, I take that's what depression has to one of the symptoms, at least, of depression. And it's interesting. I mean, and I would have loved to see that in the book. The fact that was cross-cultural, and that women are just subject to depression more than men. That makes the whole discussion of postpartum depression very interesting. But I love how you saved the idea of postpartum depression from psychosis. It was very well done.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think it's important for people to know the difference.
What makes women more likely to combat depression in their lives over men?
Oh, well, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of theories as to why women are diagnosed 2-to-1. One is that there might be something physical, something biological that is different. Another theory
might it be hormones? I mean, it seems
it's right there. There's not evidence yet to any consistent evidence. As I point out in the book, when we've looked at studies that measure, and it's tough to do a study where you do blood tests and measure hormone levels. It's tough to get people to agree to that and follow them for years. When you measure hormone levels over time, especially when we look at menopausal women, there's no relationship to depression. We do see, as far as age goes, men and women rates of depression go down as they age. The 20s are the hardest time for everybody, and which is, I'm very sad for the young people.
It's a human condition.
It is a struggle, and the older people get, including women, those rates of depression go down. I mean, of course, there's another theory that says that women are more likely to experience depression because they have more to be depressed about. Worldwide, women are more likely to be poor. They're less likely to have rights. So their conditions are such that it's just more depressing. So there are a lot of possibilities there.
I want to ask you one more question. So inevitably, when you're talking about gender, sex, politics gets involved. This is, at the end of the day, what we call gender politics. And so I wanted to know from you, what do you think is something that folks on the left get wrong about the hormone myth and folks on the right get wrong about the hormone myth? Some misconceptions on both sides about gender and sex.
Well, I think on the left, I think there is too much of an orthodoxy that we must stick to this idea that gender is completely socially constructed. I think there's some evidence that biology does play a role. I think that there's an interaction of biology and environment. There seems to be a lot of evidence for that. So I think the left maybe goes too far on that point. As far as the right, I think it's more likely that I would see it as an error in thinking that because something is biological, it's inevitable. We shouldn't try to change it, that somehow that makes it destiny.
Scott, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, darn it, I was going to say many of the same things. Just that I'd have to change. Let me talk in different terms about the right. I mean, I think there's these two things. Sex is your body. Gender is society's idea of what a man and a woman should be. And I think the characteristic error of the left is to think gender is divorced from sex. And I think that's what Robyn just said. And I think the characteristic error of the right is to think that sex over-determines gender. That there is some flexibility in what men and women are, could be, but it's not infinite. And that's what the right needs to know, but it's not an infinite creativity. That's what the left needs to know. And I often thought when I was reading your book, Robyn, that I thought you were suffering a little bit from the error of the left in denying the importance of hormones, in I don't know, like suggesting the direction of both male and female character.
Mm-hmm. Well, to be honest, the point of the book was to look at how hormones are related to mental functioning and to emotions. And I think that it's pretty clear that hormones don't seem to have a substantial effect for, I'd say, about 80% of women on how well they're going to function. And that's important. One of the reasons that we didn't get into as to why that's important is that point of view has facilitated all kinds of bad health care for women. That whole industries have been built up around prescribing women for this sickness that they have, that, oh, you don't have enough hormones, you've got too much hormones, your hormones are going up and down. That has been based on very little research and in the long term has been harmful to women.
All right, Robyn, Scott, thank you to you both. We want to take some time to do some questions from our viewers. So this first one is from Lewis Riley. He writes, you say the hormone myth is a way to keep women subjugated. Could it be an expression of sympathy instead?
Oh, well, that's patriarchy right there. The protective, let me take care of you, don't do anything too hard. Oh, it must be just terrible for you. I don't buy that for a minute.
All right, this next one is from Elena Fisher. What if older women buy into the hormone myth based on their own personal experience rather than having it ingrained into their minds?
Well, I think it depends which context. I mean, certainly there's a lot of messages out there telling you that reproductive processes are going to make you a little crazy, a little irrational, a little depressed. And if you're, whatever state you're in, if that is causing some emotional changes, then I think that does need to be acknowledged. One important point is that it's largely possible it's still within the normal range of behavior. We like to think that men are these monolithic, even mood people and women are up and down and up and down. But long-term studies show that men and women have about the same number of mood changes in a day across time. So number one, you may be moody, but there's lots of other reasons you could be moody too. And number two, if you are experiencing symptoms that are infringing on your functioning and making your life difficult, you absolutely should get help. I mean, there is a small minority of women, when it comes to menopause, about 20%, who do suffer from problems that affect their functioning, and they absolutely should be validated and get help.
So Scott, that last question was about hormone myth and whether or not it's validated based off people's personal experiences, versus propagandizing. What was your thought on that?
Well, I mean, I think Robyn's book really allows for the idea that their personal experiences are reflective of the hormone myth. I mean, she shows that a certain percentage of women suffer from, extremes of postpartum depression or menopausal problems. So I think it's consistent with her overall argument to say that some people actually do suffer from these things. Yeah, that's how I'd respond.
All right, and now it's time for 3 questions, where the reviewer asks 3 questions directly to the author. Scott, go ahead.
So Robyn, are there any differences between men and women that you believe are traceable to hormones?
Traceable to hormones. I mean, certainly reproductive hormones that women have make them be able to reproduce, and that's a difference. That's something that men can't do. Do you mean in terms of personality or traits?
Well, maybe athletic prowess, aggressiveness, bonding, things like that.
Well, I think with aggressiveness and athletic prowess, certainly hormones have something to do with men with being able to build muscle mass. That seems very clear biologically. But as far as aggressiveness in terms of sports competition, we see in the last 30 years after Title IX, so many girls and women getting into sports and exhibiting lots of competitiveness and strength and power. So I would question if there's a significant limiter on that feeling and performance in terms of hormones.
My next question, I don't know, is a little more abstract, I think, but I'm really interested in your view on it. And that is, when would we know that the differences between men and women that we observe are not caused by society, but rather are the reflections of what they want? Do you think there's a point where we could say we've achieved that?
The ability to know whether...
Yeah, like when could we say women have achieved equality?
When could we say that? Wow, that's a big question. But I want to
Like,
go back a second to what you first said.
Would we have to have a 50-50 division in Congress? Would we have to have a 50-50 division among CEOs?
I think somewhere near that would imply that there was equality in terms of power. I think the feminist movement wants there to be equal opportunity for everybody to do everything. That men get to experience the sweetness of taking a baby out of the bath, and that women get to fulfill their achievement needs and maybe lead a company. That everyone should get the opportunity to experience the full range of emotions and the full range of experiences available to human beings.
And my last question, and it's on the same track as that second question. Why do you think that undergraduates, they're 58%, I think it is now, trending towards 60, that 60% of the undergraduates will soon be females and around 40% males?
Well, I think the numbers show that it's not that there's fewer males going to college. It's that there's a larger percentage of minority women who are attending college now, especially Hispanic women. Their numbers of college attendance have gone up. So I don't think there's fewer men.
You don't think there's fewer men than women?
Right. I think the same number of men are getting educated, but just that more women have stepped up from working class to get into college.
Okay, and that's all the time we have today. Again, the book is The Hormone Myth, How Junk Science, Gender Politics, and Lies About PMS Keep Women Down by Robyn Stein DeLuca. We'd like to thank Dr. DeLuca for joining us today to discuss this book, and Scott Yenor of Boise State University for offering his critique. And thank you for watching Bookmarks. I'm Stephen Kent. We'll see you next time.